And they pull up on the screen, like the guy's, voice track, right? And then they just start to edit it, and they just start to change the things that it's saying, right? And the amount of of horror that appeared, because like these tech guys, Deming were just like so pumped and jazzed, like showing this thing off, and the audience was too, because they were all there for it. Right?
They're like, look, there was you can't trust anything anymore. Isn't this great? Butterscotch shenanigans. Hey everybody, welcome to episode 385 of Coffee with Butterscotch, the game dev comedy podcast of Butterscotch Shenanigans. I'm Seth and I'm the games programmer.
I'm Adam and I'm the webs programmer.
I'm Sam and I'm the artist.
This is a show where we talk about life, business, and working in the games industry. Today is Octumbler Squirrel Beans 2020.
We haven't had one of those in a while, Seth. I feel like you're back.
We got to get back.
October
back to
Squirrel Beans is a particularly good one too. Mm-hmm. It's got a really good.
It's about that time of year when the squirrels are all taking everyone's beans and then storing them in their bean buckets for the winter. It's dangerous out there because this is when, if you're walking around, sometimes a squirrel bean bucket just falls right on your head, knock you right out cold.
Dangerous. Mm-hmm.
And it's not even a good way to store the beans because it's not insulated.
Nope.
It's just an open air bucket. Yep. But squirrel technology really hasn't moved forward much.
Yeah, squirrels haven't discovered the metaverse yet. So, they're all.
Yeah, which we'll talk about. But if they put their beans in there, then who knows where they would go.
Then they can also attach NFTs to each bean and they can, then they can sell them.
And then each bean is unique and scarce and, you could sell the bean and, there's a lot they could be doing with tech and they're just really behind, frankly. Mm-hmm. Also, before we go any further, this podcast will have profanity in it, just huge volumes of profanity. So if you're a child, then, you have that to look forward to because we know children love swears. Oh, yeah. But if you're a parent, you probably don't want your child to hear it. So, you'll ask them to leave the room, I think is how that goes.
You should, though, because it is hilarious when children swear. It's just the best. It's the best
so
thing.
Good. Yep. So good. And you have to pretend. It's kind of like when your dog does something bad and they're like acting really sulking about it, but it's kind of hilarious how like ashamed they look. And so you have to still pretend like you're mad, but you're not actually mad because you're kind of laughing inside.
It's like people are breaking character on SNL. You got to do that. Like hold your face. Hold it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Pinch each other. Whatever you got to do.
So that's the children swearing thing. It's just too funny, but you got to pretend like it's not. Also, we'd like to thank our recurring supporters over at moneygrab.bscotch.net. Thanks for letting us grab your money. And we're gonna keep doing that as long as you guys keep giving it to me. Helps keep our mics on. All right, now let's talk about what's been going on. All right, now we can talk about Crashlands 2, or we could talk about the metaverse. I feel like we already kind of cracked open that nut.
Yeah, let's get in there.
All right, so this is just. I just want to take a moment to just reflect on the news that came out this week that since starting work on the metaverse in the first quarter of 2021, so it's been under 2 years.
Is that when they changed their name to Meta and everything? Was that only?
I think it was around there. So Meta or Facebook, they have spent $15 billion trying to develop the metaverse.
And that is with a B.
With a B. And they had their big event this past week or week and a half or whatever, where they unveiled their latest technology, which is that avatars have legs now.
I saw the tweet from like the Meta account or whatever that was advertising that. It was like an announcement sort of a thing, right? But I thought when I first saw it that it was a satire piece from some other source, because it was such a bizarre celebration item, it was very strange.
Yeah. Because up until now, people have seen screenshots and videos of the metaverse and stuff, and it looks like graphics from the mid 90s, right? In terms of like the quality and stuff. And I was even noticing that in their tech demo where they were showing up, they were talking to each other with their avatars and they had legs and stuff. There's no shadows.
Yeah, I think that's actually the main thing. I was looking at it because these announcements recently have been kind of coming out about Meta stuff, And I was looking at it and I was like, it is exactly that problem. It just looks like
eerie.
somebody made a 3D scene without any lighting. It's just everything just has light on it. You know?
So you tell me that the $15 billion they've spent, they didn't hire, I don't know, an art director.
Well, this is what I want to get into because it feels like, all right, so with $15 billion, you can do literally anything. And somehow they have managed to do almost nothing. So here's some of the stuff that you could do with $15 billion. Okay. So Meta has 83,500 employees.
That's a lot.
That's a lot,
Jesus.
right?
Yeah.
If every single one of those people was working on the metaverse, then Facebook would have paid every single one of those people about $180,000 for their time to work on the metaverse.
So they could have
the
just
last 2 years.
They could have just been entire company. We're just working on the
Entire
metaverse.
company, everybody's getting almost $200,000, and that would have been $15 billion.
And almost that means also almost all of their personnel would have been probably paid a lot more than they're being paid right now.
Yeah. Because of course they don't have all 83,000. It's probably a much, much smaller proportion of, in which case, what is happening to this money, right? Because something else you could do with $15 billion is the median household price, the price to purchase a home in the United States is $428,700.
Is that the median right now?
That's the median.
Holy shit.
You could buy 35,000 houses.
Buy a town. I think it's just buying a town. Actually,
You could buy an entire city
Also,
worth of houses.
It's probably legal to do that because companies or people are allowed to do anything, which means you literally, like Facebook,
They could.
literally could have bought 35,000 houses.
Or you could hire a really smart, like high school kid who's just looking for a side gig. You could pay them at the federal minimum wage, and you could have that kid work on the metaverse for 238,183 years.
Yeah.
For $15 billion.
Actually, if you put this into human like labor hours, like because this is one of those fun things about like you launch a game and then you look at the average play time and then times how many players you have, and you're like, oh, like wow, the number of hours of human life that now people have like put into our game is amazing, right? Or if you take our studio and you say we as a team worked on this game for 2 years and you just compute those hours and you're like, okay, well that means this many hours of human labor went into it, right?
Yeah.
So if we were to pay, assuming like paying some rate per hour, how many human hours of labor is 15 billion with a B dollars?
Maybe flip it on this way. Let's say you had a crack team of 500 people working on the metaverse, which is
That's a big
a
lot.
shitload of people, right? So
Because you're talking like
just,
all focused on like the development and creation.
you've got your software engineers, you've got your hardware engineers.
We're kicking everybody else out. This is like only
You've got some marketing people. You've got an advertising wing.
Okay,
who's
so
like
it is the
promoting
full
product.
thing. Okay,
Look, yeah, you get a 500 person company working on this kind of thing. Like that's a healthy number of people it's like in the R&D stage of things, right? Because like once you actually have to manufacture the units and all that stuff, then you start to require more hands, right? But so if you had 500 people just developing this thing over 2 years, what is that, right? So that's like 40 hours a week. Let's say they're crunching, okay, and they're doing 60 hours a week,
Probably.
right? 50 weeks a year, right? Mm-hmm. So that's 3,000 hours per person per year, 2 years. So 6,000 hours per person, 500 people. So that's 3 million hours would have gone into making this thing. 3 million, okay? 15 billion divided by 3 million, okay? $5,000 per hour is what you would have to pay those people.
Right. You could pay
So you would have to be paying people $5,000 per hour
a huge team
to spend that much money.
We've established.
I don't understand how this
I don't understand where the money could have possibly
Where do you think it's
gone.
going? That's my question. Because if we've established that, like, this is an astronomical amount of money, and it's confusing, both from, just in a wide variety of ways, it's confusing. But like,
It's an incomprehensible amount of money.
but where is it?
To develop one product over 2 years that isn't even like viable or ready for market. I mean,
Yeah, we should say like it is extremely difficult to develop a new technology. Right? Like it takes a long time. It takes a lot of smart people. Like that's all true. But how does it cost $15 billion? Where does that come? Because I can see it in cases where it's like like military spending stuff, right? Like when you get a defense contractor, right? Because now you got a whole bunch of people and like hyperinflated rates of things, but they're dealing with also like large amounts of materials and moving them places, and then like all
typically
these
blowing them up is the other.
And then literally there's
whenever they test something, it's destroyed and they have to make an entirely new one. Like this is tech we're talking about, and it's largely a software.
Software. There is hardware involved, definitely.
Well, yeah, of course it's both, right? Because they're trying to develop the VR tech to make it, so that it's much higher powered and cheaper and whatever. But then they unveiled the new Oculus headset at $1,500 MSRP, right? So it's like all of that investment did not make the product cheaper, right? Or like they couldn't find like a way to manufacture it or make it in a way that's actually like accessible or affordable to people. And the thing that we've always kind of talked about with VR is there's this huge barrier, which is that to go into VR, you need space, right? So that you aren't like flailing around and smashing your furniture and your computer and whatever. You need reliable power. You need, in the case of the metaverse, you need high-speed internet, right? And then also you need a lifestyle that allows you to completely isolate yourself visually and auditorily from everyone and everything around you. So if you have a dog that needs to go out, you won't know that they're at the door trying to get you to let them out. If you have kids who need your attention, you can't pay attention to them. If you have a spouse, they can't say anything to you or get your attention either because you've got headphones on, your eyes are covered, you're locked in, right? And so it's not like the iPhone where you can just like when the iPhone first came out, it was a replacement for something people already had, which was a cell phone in their pocket, right? And it was a much better version of that, and it just kind of like seamlessly worked its way into what people were already doing, and you can choose your level of involvement, right? But that's not the case with VR, and no matter how much money, like how good the tech gets, or how small the headset gets or whatever, you still have this intractable problem that almost nobody can do it, like just like in terms of how it fits into your life. So I don't know. It's good. I mean, it's interesting watching the train wreck of this, like throwing good money after bad.
It reminds me of old stories about Holy Grail quests, right? Where everyone's like, "There's this thing, and it's super powerful, probably, but also we don't really know what it is,
or like trying to turn lead into gold."
Philosopher's Stone, whichever one you want. But the crux of the tale is always something around the lines of like, we don't actually know if it will do the thing that we think it will do. We've got some mythical mixed reports. And we're not really sure exactly also the shape of it, but we're going to put together like a big, expedition party to go get this thing. And usually what happens is that the whole expedition dies, like 99% of the time, right? Or they return empty-handed and then, owe money to various people. So I think what's weird about it on the metaverse side is because it feels the same, right? Where it's like people they're talking about a concept, they're talking about a concept, right? This idea of being able to, embody
replacing
space,
real life with virtual life, basically.
Yeah. Right? Well, and it's a lot of the it would be cool if kind of thing.
So like 100%.
So like one of the things that people talk about that is possible with this kind of tech is that you can create your own kind of like control interface. So instead of, having to like buy a keyboard that you then like plunk onto your desk and are typing onto, if you're a software engineer or something, you can basically like create your own virtual keyboard that lives in virtual space, but that has as many buttons as you want that do whatever you want them to do, right? Which is like, oh, that's pretty cool, but also have no tactile feedback.
But I mean, again, it's like blockchain, right? It's like it can be cool tech, and there's a whole bunch of like, yeah, it would be cool if, but it's
useful. What is it broadly applicable?
What is it for? I think that's the interesting thing with like the meta stuff is that it has such a like dry corporate approach, and it looks like they're trying to looks like they're trying to create the virtual version of like the corporate dystopia, right? Like that's what it feels like is happening.
It looks like that too.
It looks exactly like it. 'Cause it's like it is literally like if you imagine like all the things that people do, the way that people describe modern corporate life, right? And then you look at Meta and what they're doing and what they're showing us about the metaverse stuff, right? It feels like that's what they're creating, and I don't really understand even what they're trying to sell to companies with that. But there is another possibility here to consider. So Facebook, universally reviled company, right? Literally nobody's in Facebook's corner. Right?
Yeah, but Facebook doesn't exist anymore. It's Meta now. It's a whole new thing.
But it has no goodwill, literally zero, right?
Yeah.
So what they want to do now is they want to make a new technology that pervades your life even deeper than what Facebook originally did, where they earned all of that ill will, right? Now, if that's what they want to do, is they want to create that, but they know that getting people on board with how much ill will they have is going to be basically impossible. There is an approach one could take, which is to display such apparent incompetence that you go from being evil to being a joke. Right.
So people are like,
you can come back
there's
from
no
being
way
a
they
joke.
could steal all my data and harm me because they have no idea what they're doing.
Yeah, because you can come back from being a joke because think about it, because it is like it's indescribably bizarre that they're investing all of this money, right? And then what we're seeing is stuff without shadows, right? Without like any lighting effects that has the sterility of just a medium 90s video game, right? Because that part of the technology problem is not the hard part, right? So
every
why
video
isn't
game
it there,
has solved
right?
this problem.
Yeah, and like
making something look good.
and it seems just so unlikely that you haven't, because like Facebook, again, universally reviled company, but it's full of very smart people, right?
These are the kind of conspiracies that I like to buy into. That's a good one. Facebook is purposefully just taking a stick and shoving it in the spokes and be like, oh, wow, we're so dumb. Oh, wow, we're so dumb. You can still.
I mean, I wish. I think it's just it's probably more of a combination of.
Well, honestly, I hope it's not that. I hope it just actually is incompetence. That's what I would prefer.
I think that's what it is. Yeah.
Yeah, because of course, like if you have that many people working at a company, like you would need so many people working there to be going along with the idea of purposely doing a terrible job.
Well, no,
to restore the company's image. Be like, nobody cares.
You wouldn't, though, because normally when it comes to this kind of a thing, you don't actually show the incomplete progress unless the thing that you're showing like is an amazing demonstration, right? And so like the video game industry is a perfect example of this. Like you don't see a demo or actually look at the Grand Theft Auto 6 the leak, right?
The leak
from a month or two ago, where the gaming community, because they don't know how to interpret that early phase information. And so they interpret it in the worst way possible. And then now there's like this kind of stain, right, on the idea of what GTA 6 is. And video game companies know this. And so they always keep this stuff just as private as possible until the reveal is already something that people can buy into, right?
Yep.
And that's true. Like in the software world, that's less true because there's the idea of like try out a prototype early and see if you can get people on board and that kind of stuff. And so it's a little more fluid. But still, like you're trying to create an entire good experience, like at each step of the way, right? So it's weird to me that they're releasing this stuff early, is the first part when it's like so incomplete, right?
Well, they have to.
But if you imagine, like if you're basically orchestrating something of this scale, right? That's taking $15 billion and some huge number of people, right? There's going to be a handful of like people deciding what order things go in, right?
No, that's true.
And so if you could just decide, hey, we want to show this stuff early. So I think a good example of that, there's actually I can't remember who it was, but there's somebody who talked about this idea more generally, which is that a new technology that is going to dramatically impact people's lives and potentially in a negative way, which is most technologies, right? it shakes up the social fabric, right? And it usually causes harm to people who are already being harmed. That's almost always what happens, right? But it's when people first see these things, when it's new, people actually don't have that much trouble putting it in context and being like, oh no, I don't want that, right? But if they get repeated exposure to it in a way that is sort of propagandized, right? Then over time, you can sneak through this. And we actually see this right now with deep fake video tech, right? So I don't know if you guys remember, but maybe, I don't know, 5 years ago or something, I think it was Adobe. Was it Adobe or somebody, IBM, Adobe, somebody had some sort of a cool, keynote event, right? And they go up on stage and they had some actor, I can't remember who it was at this point, who was like emceeing, right? And the guys walk around saying some stuff. And they pull up on the screen, like the guy's, voice track, right? And then they just start to edit it, and they just start to change the things that it's saying, right? And suddenly it just sounds like this person saying those things, right? And the amount of of horror that appeared, because like these tech guys, Deming were just like so pumped and jazzed and like showing this thing off, and the audience was too, because they were all there for it, right?
They're like, look, there was you can't trust anything anymore.
Yeah, everybody was
great.
Everybody was just like terrified, and so then the pushback they got from the broader community and the broader world was so swift and intense that technology appeared to disappear. It just suddenly they were quiet about it. It just didn't exist, right? And now I don't know if anybody watches America's Got Talent, but one of the fucking acts of that show was a deepfake technology, right? Where they bring it in, they bring a camera in and they bring an opera singer, right? And they video the opera singer, they project it up at the top, but then it's a live deepfake. They put like Simon Cowell's head on that person's head, right? Whoa. And it looks like Simon Cowell singing. Like you don't have to look too hard to see like there's something off about it, right? But it's not that off.
But given that this tech is just like a half a decade old.
Yeah. And so the audience fucking loved it. They made it all the way through the whole thing, right? And like the judges are just singing praises of it. The whole audience is like so pumped, right? When a mere few years ago, when it was first announced, right, in a much more precise context, but without people in a context who could make it seem fun and cute.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
And so now we all of a sudden went to this. We've already blown past this now, where we were when this tech was first announced, nothing but horror, and now everyone's excited about it, right? And so this is what it's like. I'm looking at what Meta's doing. I'm like, they've displayed enough incompetence in the past that it could just be incompetence, right? But I'm suspicious. Suspicious.
What this kind of also makes me think of, like, people always talk about, you have, your dystopian future movies where it's like, oh my gosh, the robots, rose up and killed all of us. It's always the AI kind of like becomes sentient and takes over the world, right? But what you don't really see in like dystopian sci-fi stuff is what happens. What's that intermediate stage where AI is really, really good and can basically enable people to do almost anything that they want to do, right? So like if somebody could deep fake you and make it look like you have said and done whatever they want you to have said and done, right? And they have just hours and hours of video quote evidence of you having done this stuff. And of course you never did, right? What kind of a world is that, right? Mm-hmm. Or even like you guys have seen, like there's this DALL-E, AI art generation thing, right? And I saw this really controversial discussion where there was an art contest, and somebody had spent a few hours sort of curating a prompt to get an image that they really want, they just because with these AI art generation things, you basically describe something and then the AI generates an image, and then you can change the prompt a little bit and get some new images, and you can kind of keep doing that and to refine what it is that the AI is doing, right? And then you can, once you get an image you like, you can just save it or keep, whatever it is you want to do with it, right? And so somebody submitted an AI-generated image to an art competition, and they won. Mm-hmm. And they only revealed afterwards that it was an AI that did it, right? And so then there's all this conversation about how, are we going to have to now have ways of like people supervising the artists as they make stuff so that we know that it's legitimate,
Well, this is also a line drawing problem, right? Because you can make the same argument, because like I've seen some of the cool shit that really good digital artists can do in, say, Photoshop, right? Where the combination of like the wild just tech that's built into Photoshop and then like the brushes and like all these different things, right? And then the tricks that they learn make it so that like what they can do compared to what somebody sitting down with physical materials can do, right? Is that similar kind of a leap, right? Where it's like you basically get a whole bunch of things like quote unquote for free, right?
Yep.
The reality is, of course, it's just a different kind of expertise than using physical media, right? And the same idea is like really understanding how to make an AI do something you want is a real form of expertise, right? But those three things aren't the same, though the first two are definitely closer to each other, right?
It kind of blurs the question of I think I think it's unsportsmanlike in the spirit of a competition, but because of the implied rules of the competition are that you yourself with your hands drew the lines and painted or whatever it was, but it is a blurry line because like you said, there's a skill and an eye to sort of curating an AI prompt and getting it to produce a striking image that is good enough to win an art competition, right? And like if that image wouldn't have existed if that person hadn't sat down for 3 hours and tried to find out, like, make that AI do it, right? So in this way, it's the AI is a tool that the person is using in the same way that somebody can use Photoshop or whatever, but it's just such a different and powerful tool that it doesn't fit.
I think it's so removed from physically doing. I think is the part where it because it's basically declarative, right? And I think actually this is also how like code AI tools work. Is you can like if you can like type out your comments describing what you want to do, right? And the code AI can use that to then help kind of pre-populate some code that it thinks will do that, right? And
so like your GitHub Copilot,
right? And so you're kind of moving from like this more hands-on process of like physically creating the code or physically creating the
typing every semicolon and
to one where you're describing what it is that you're trying to do, and then basically getting a draft that you then come in and tweak. But depending on the realm, right? So like because if the AI is good enough that your explanation of what you want is then also the thing that comes out, whether that's art or whether it's code, right? Then you get removed from just kind of the physical act of doing that part, because now all the expertise that comes into play is your ability to describe what you want in terms that an AI can understand to give you what you want reliably.
It's sort of like Google searching in some ways, right?
It's exactly like that, yeah.
Yeah, you learn how to up your Google foo so you can solve problems, but usually what that means is learning how to type prompts in very dumb ways because Google understands it better in a particular format versus what you might actually ask a person about something. But I think the discussion to me it feels similar to the one we saw, just adopting game engines in many ways. 10,
like back in the Ludum Dare days when you had to write your own engine from scratch or you were disqualified from the competition.
But didn't have to write your own programming language or build your own computer.
Yeah.
There's always a line you got to pick.
Yeah, there's always a line. And so it is an interesting one where, being around for basically the kind of chaos that is caused when a new line is able to be drawn, and then the fact that everybody has to sort of jointly participate essentially in typically initially demonizing the easier side of the line that's enabled by the tool is always how it happens first. And then typically a little bit later, then essentially everybody works that tool into their kit, right? Especially as the tool gets better. Because I think it's like I tried to use, I wanted to see what it would be if I tried to use some of the DALL-E 2 credits that I had to generate some concepts for like an enemy that we're working on Crashlands 2. It's like very mediumly useful because, again, going back to what I've talked about before, if you have a large integrated body of work that you're trying to put something into, you're not going to get basically anything you need out of something like this, aside from like,
Yeah, it's not there yet. Yep.
yeah, aside from like maybe like a general shape idea, but you don't get anything usable really. But it does allow you to kind of poke around. But in the same way that like right now I go to Pinterest and I do the same shit on Pinterest, right? Where I'm like, like a robotic, frog with whatever concept art, robotic creature or whatever, right? It's not. So I do as an artist, when you go and build references, you do very much the same thing, but it's just in a manual capacity where you're curating a pile of images that are sort of an approximation of where you're trying to get to. I think for certain kinds of work is where the Dolly stuff gets weird, where you're, like you said, if it's a one-off images, where you're not there's not an integrated body of stuff that you need to somehow get something into. There's not any technical specs to the thing. It's much more straightforward. It's just, if it's just a picture, if it's just an illustration, then yeah, I think there's some weird lines to figure out because.
But also like what's really fascinating about this is I think the amount of power that people have now, even disregarding the AI stuff that we're talking about, but just like with something like Google, right? Or Photoshop or these kinds of things. There's that book, How the World Really Works, which is a great book. It's just a dude who like just dug through research, like billions of research papers, and did tons of math to try to like figure out what's really going on, just in the world. Like what are the different things that like really matter in terms of like industries and how do things all connect to each other? And one of the big things that he talked about, this idea of like, there's a revolutionary leap every time people find ways to harness a new source of energy and capitalize on it, right? So at one point it was just fire, because then you can cook your food and then you don't have to you have like less risk of illness, and also it's easier to digest and you don't need as much food to get the energy out of it, whatever, right? And then there's stuff like steam engines and coal, and there's gasoline and combustion engines and nuclear power, stuff like that. But you can also think about it in terms of, time in versus production out. And so, at one point in time, I can't remember what the units were, but it's something dramatic. Like, it used to be that for farming, it was like 18 minutes of work to produce a bushel of wheat or something like that. A couple hundred years ago, and now it's about 2 seconds, right? So if you average out a farmer's time, which is why now like almost so few people are farmers relative to the global population, but they can still produce enough food because the technology has turned every unit of their time into like 1,000-fold more output, right? And so now, though, a lot of people moved into cities and live in service and tech work and knowledge work, right? And all of this AI stuff is kind of like it's harnessing this new kind of energy so that like you don't have to put in nearly as much time or thought into producing something, right? So, imagine if 50 years from now, what's it going to be like when these AIs, they can just produce a gorgeous painting or an incredible concept work that is the thing that's exactly what you wanted. Yeah. Right. Every single time. Or like with the code thing, like there may be a point where you never even look at the code. You just tell the AI, this is what I want my game to do, or this is what I want my software to do. And it will compile the stuff and take care of everything for you. And you'll never have to know how any of it works, which means like anybody can be an artist, a musician, a programmer, a financial guru, because nobody is.
Well, I think
it's all just the machines.
but I think that still discounts the input, though, right? Because like a farmer can generate a fuckload of bushels of things in 2 seconds, right? But what do they have to do still to do that, right? Well, they have to have procured enough capital to get one of these machines to be able to do it, and they have to learn how the seasonality impacts things so they know when they're supposed to do stuff. They have to like learn how the software works to do right. There's all these things that still have to happen. And like any one of these things over time, the more because the limiting factor all the time for these kinds of things, the one that is the hardest to overcome is the ability to describe what you want to happen. Right. And the harder it is to do that, the harder it is to automate it.
Well, I would say
right?
the ability
But it's a displacement problem though, because
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
it used to be the case, and the real disruption here is like it used to be the case that almost everybody was a farmer because they had to be, right? And as the technology makes it so that it takes so much less input to farm, like on a per person per unit of output basis, right? Then farming just is no longer a feasible path for 80% of the population to be doing because that's way too much food. Right? There's the supply and demand doesn't allow for it. Right now we're in this mode where there's a lot of tech work, right? Like if you want to get a great job, it's like, yeah, go into comp sci, become a programmer, do all that stuff. But we're also at the same time developing these tools, these AIs that solve or are trying to solve or are becoming better at solving so many of the kinds of problems that go into that, it may be the case that over the next 50 years, 100 years, you'll see a similar kind of displacement where you actually need very few knowledge workers either, right? To do stuff. And then what else is there now? Like, what do if computers are the knowledge workers, right? They make our movies, they make our games, they write our code, cause like right now you got like a studio like Pixar that would, it'll take so many people, so many hours or years to produce a great film. Well, if a computer can tell a story, can generate images, can generate music, can do all that stuff, and if that can be refined, then you could have an AI that could pump out a great movie every 10 seconds,
I think my main argument against this sort of inevitable outcome is that to make that happen, we have to be good enough at doing these things ourselves to figure out how to make these things good at it, right? And how many movies are good? How many songs are good?
Well,
but
I
it's
mean,
just
I
a
think
numbers game.
Oh, it is, sure, but because the claim here is that like we're gonna take knowledge work out of it, right? And that's the part where I disagree. I agree with you completely that things are gonna keep shifting, but the place they're gonna keep shifting is where they've already been shifting, which is you need fewer people to accomplish any given scale of output of anything, right, over time, right?
Yeah.
That's true. But what are those people doing, right? And what those people are doing is they are deciding what the output is supposed to be and describing it, right? And that does shift backwards constantly. That's absolutely true, right? So I agree with you completely that all this stuff like shifts and moves, and you do need fewer people to accomplish the same scale of outcome over time, right?
Yeah.
But what that actually means is that we just keep on like being pushed backwards into these spaces where we haven't yet figured out how to describe something well enough, reliably enough that we can make, machines and AIs and whatever do that stuff, right? Mm-hmm. But we will eventually figure that thing out too, right? And we will keep kind of moving backwards, right? But there's kind of like, you just kind of keep on going until we basically recreate people. At that point, that's when now like, there's nothing for actual people to do, right?
Yeah.
But like you got to get pretty far down that path. But the problem is moving as we go on that journey, right? That it's not sustainable under growth-based economies, right? Because if you're constantly pushing, if you make it so that fewer and fewer people can do more and more, right? And the effort, and now like think about, because we're talking about this as if like it's easier and easier to do these things, right? Which actually isn't true. It becomes less accessible to do each of these things because the amount of like stuff you have to have access to grows. Like the amount of capital you need to be a farmer today, fucking enormous, right? All these cool AIs and things. Well, yeah, those all exist, right? But what was required to make them exist and maintain them, right? And then all of the access is gated to all these things, right? So fewer and fewer people need to, but also get to, right?
Yeah. And so then what's left for everybody else?
What's left for everybody else. And so that's where, and this is also why the idea of like adaptability is always like adaptability of using tools that's always your safest bet of a thing to invest your time and energy into, right? Because as the stuff does change, it allows you to kind of keep on moving yourself backwards, right? As like the stuff downstream gets easier and more taken care of, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, the system won't be able. The system's already can't handle it, right? Where we're currently at.
Yeah, but it only accelerates, right? Like the pace of change only accelerates. I mean, it's been fascinating to like. There's the game dev or indie gaming subreddits where people will often post their stuff, and you'll nowadays you'll see a post by, a high school kid. They're like, hey, like I don't know how to code, but like I just started like putting together my first game. What do you think? I've been working on it for a couple of months. And it looks so much better than like cool any AAA game that I played in like 2015, because the tools are just getting so good that I mean, it's something that I reflect on of like, it already is the case that there's just a glut of games that get produced, because of the tools. The tools just get better and better and better, and so. Ultimately, like, what does the games industry look like when, 20 years from now, when something like Unreal Engine is so good at making games, with so little expertise required to really do it that, like back like when we were kids, we would like play pretend, right? Well, like, what if like a 5-year-old can just bang out a game in a couple of hours, with their friends, and then they can play that game for the weekend.
But the expertise, because I think the focus here, though, and I think this is where I just tend to kind of just disagree with these outcomes, because all these things are enabling is this very technical stuff, right? It's making it possible to like you boot up a game engine, you've never even seen it, you just boot it up and you can render a cube, and it looks fucking amazing, right? And you can go to the asset store and buy some assets and plop them in the game, and they come pre-animated so they can like walk around or whatever, right? And like, that's amazing. Like, I couldn't code that up by myself, like just like I couldn't just go do that. I wouldn't have been able to 10 years ago. I couldn't do it now, right? But I could do that here. But you know what I wouldn't be able to do, even given all of that, is design a good game experience. You know what I mean? Just like in a vacuum, because that's actually still like the hardest, like we were talking about this, right? Like the hardest part of making games is not making games. That is hard, but that is getting easier, right? The hardest part still is designing them in a way so that you've created some kind of an experience that you can convince other people that they want to have, and that when they do actually have it, that they enjoy it, right? And that isn't solved by making it easier to make the things. It just means that if you are good at constructing a unique, marketable, enjoyable experience, right, that you're now more enabled to do it technically.
Yeah, I think that maybe the place where I find the discussion about this stuff getting confused in the same kind of way is this difference between output and outcome, right? Which is like what you're saying, Adam, which is like, a DALL-E can produce basically infinite images of whatever you describe. But again, like, are you able to actually communicate what it is that you need? And can it give you back specifically what it is that you need? And is that a thing that actually accomplishes the outcome that you were looking for?
Yeah, because if the outcome is just make lots of cool pictures, like, oh yeah, that thing crushes it. It's hard to do anything else, right? But yeah, like because I've tried to use a few of these tools and can't get anything that I want, right? And I was barely even like trying to like, I didn't actually even need something. I was just like, oh, let me see if I can make this happen. And I just couldn't. Right. So, and over time, like these things they'll get there. In the same way that like just literally in the past like year of me using GitHub Copilot, which is the AI programming tool, it's gotten already so much better that like I can pretty well count on it. Like I've learned how to describe stuff to it. Right. So that it's likely to give me a pretty good outcome. Right. And it's also learning at the same time, based on all the people interacting with it, about and like whether or not they accept its suggestions, right? To make it better at converting what people are asking for into something, right? But it's still the limiting factor is always not just like how do you make sure you're describing it in a way that it can understand, but how you're describing it in a way that's unambiguous in the first place, right? And this is because this is where. Like, this is what makes programming hard. This is what makes art hard. This is what makes anything hard. Is basically actually fully articulating the desired outcome, right? Because if you think about like, oh, we're gonna make Crashlands 2. Like Crashlands 2 is the desired outcome, right? But now try to describe it, right?
That's what we've been doing that for 2 years.
Explicitly and completely, right? In such a way that you could have even another just person, right? Interpret what you've just said in such a way that the outcome they imagine is the one that you're imagining. Literally impossible, right?
And then
it's so far from possible. It's hilarious, right?
Yeah. But
Yeah, that's
but I
good.
think
Yeah.
So but that's just where it's a question of like input versus output, right? Because one of the things that we've done during the course of questions too is make something that makes it way faster for us to make games.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Yeah, because we're putting the part where we're putting the hard part where it should be, which is our ability to articulate and describe what we want. Right.
Yeah, and of course, like that's what tech always is it's a new way to do the same thing that you were doing, but way faster, way cheaper, with fewer inputs, fewer people, whatever. Mm-hmm. And so
it's bringing the distance between input and output closer. That's cool.
And so that's where we have the displacement problem, because let's say you're talking about art, right? So right now, if you want to be a great artist with a great portfolio, you produce a lot of pieces, and each piece can take dozens and dozens and dozens of hours, right? Mm-hmm. And at a certain point, if using AI to generate art becomes like just the easiest and fastest way to do it, and it takes then 1 hour of curating a prompt to get a great piece instead of 50 hours of digital work, right? Then one artist with a good eye, right? Which was who was making the art to begin with, they can now make art at 50 times the pace, right? They can make so many more pieces in such a short amount of time that that person can sort of dominate.
I think, right? But I think it's kind of like an output versus outcome thing, because like you're correct in the output sense, but in the same way that like technically it's like saying that GitHub Copilot allows you to write a lot of lines of code without actually writing lines of code. So that's what's good about it.
No, it's not about lines of code. It's about it allows you to solve problems a lot faster, right?
Oh yeah, but we have to make sure that's actually true, though, because what is the problem you're solving by having a portfolio that was easy to create, right? Because what's the purpose of a portfolio, right? Which is there's a two parts to that. It's solving two problems. One is that you are learning how to do something, right? You're practicing a craft, and the outcome of practicing that craft is the portfolio. Whether that's telling an AI to do stuff, or whether that's hand to paper drawing stuff, whatever, right? And you need, like, when and the whole idea of that is just like it's the feedback loop. It's the practice, right? So if the distance between input and output is really short, right? I think there's another way to think about this too, right? Like when you're making an art piece or coding up something, it's not one input, right? Mm-hmm. It's an initial input and an initial output, and then repeated input output iteration loops, right?
Yep.
And that's with like an art AI thing, right? It's one input, the entire output, and then tweak the input, new entire output, right? Like there's a really different kind of relationship there, and what you're practicing it's just not the same. It's not practicing the skill of like rapid input output drawing to visual outcome, right? Kind of a thing. It's description to visual outcome, right? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So in those contexts, like it doesn't mean anything that like I can via word prompts or whatever generate a much larger portfolio, because that portfolio is about my ability to generate those word prompts. It's a different skill, right?
Yes. Is that the skill someone needs in terms of like, again, the outcome that's able to be produced? Because
it depends on what the outcomes we're going for. Like if the outcome you're looking for is like, like what I need as for some reason is fuckloads of I just need a fuckload of art assets, right? That don't need to be super precisely anything specific, right? But I need them to be like, there's something about them that I need to be true, and I need a lot of them, right? Then now you're enabled to get that in this context in a potentially affordable way, right?
Yeah.
But if the thing that you need is like, I need this very specific thing, like you're not going to go look at that person's portfolio of like their AI stuff and be like, well, you made a lot of cool AI stuff, therefore this really specific thing that I want is something that you can do, right? Mm-hmm. Because those are just different problems that are being solved.
At the moment, they are. I mean,
at the moment, yeah. I mean, all this stuff will change, but I still think the fundamental limit is your ability, because it'll get closer, but the fundamental limit is the ability to accurately describe what you want in a way that is unambiguous. And
it's just like the reality of like the engines that we use for making games doesn't make it doesn't make it easier to make a good game per se, right? It makes it easier to do all of the things associated with making games, but making it good still takes quite a bit of something else, basically. That makes sense?
Well, yeah, but what it means is that more games get produced, period.
Yeah, that's true.
Right. Which means that more good games get produced, which means that as a consumer of games, you have a lot more choice of which games to buy than you used to. Right. And so it increases the competition in the space to the point where it's a less viable path because the risk of loss is much higher, right? In the same way that like if everybody wanted to become a farmer, you know, they're competing with the output of all the other farmers already, right? And it's very difficult to do because we've got that farming problem covered, right? So I don't know. I think it's just going to happen that as everything gets easier and easier to do, there's going to be shifts in the economics of everything.
Oh yeah, I mean,
right?
in
the supply and demand, and kind of like what that ends up looking like. It will then have sort of displacement effects where certain career paths become maybe a little bit more of a winner take all kind of a thing. Like the people who are already there, or the people who are left, you know, by the end, have secured their spot, and trying to break into that is going to be very difficult to do because, you know, you've already got your established kind of like players in the market kind of a thing.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah. And I think because it's important to break this into the two components, right? Because we're all in agreement that this is like how this process works and how it's always worked, right? Is that as the context change, what you can do in that context and what's perceived as valuable in that context also changes. That's just the truth, right? And it's morally neutral, the idea that stuff changes and if you don't adapt to it, then like
it's just a fact about
right. That's just a fact.
What happens.
It is, but it is then also a morally bad thing that the economic system that we've constructed for ourselves makes it so that given that truth, people end up getting fucked, right? Mm-hmm. So like those, to me, like and I want to make sure we're keeping those ideas separate in terms of like what's going to happen and what that means, right? And it's really easy to get those two things entangled, and especially because the fear of like, oh, this is going to make it harder to succeed and all this kind of stuff, right? That's fear actually about the economic system and the consequences of change within the economic system, right? But in terms of like the just like the tech and what it means to do that itself, that itself is just actually interesting, right? The idea that what it means to make and consume art, right, has constantly been changing dramatically as technology and people change, right? But we're bumping up into a very new kind of change. That's like really big fundamental shift with the AI stuff, right? That's going to much more aggressively shake up what that stuff means than what it used to. And we're going to end up in a different space with lots of outcomes and stuff, right? And that wouldn't be bad if we didn't also couple that fact to our economic system, right? Because then it would just be interesting, right? And then we could just like, some people could do that stuff, some people could choose not to. It's kind of the same idea as like, yeah, the only way to like meaningfully succeed under the economic system we have today in farming is like enormous factory farms, right? Because the fact that they exist also makes it impossible to compete on a small scale. But so what does that mean? It means that a whole bunch of people were like, let's bring people back into this, right? And they have their little small family farm, and they sell their eggs for like 10 times the price of normal eggs. And there's people who are like, I want people involved in my shit again, right? I want to get away from this factory farm bullshit, right? And so if they can afford it, then they go buy those 10 times more expensive eggs from like the chickens that have been pet their whole lives or whatever, right? Like, as these things shift, we still see all of these things emerge, but the actual evil part and the bad part is the coupling to the economic system, which is all to say, universal basic income. Can we just fucking get on board this train, please?
Yeah, we're gonna have to.
It's the only. It's like there's no other move we have. We've never had another move anyway, right? We're already dealing with the fact that we haven't done this.
Yep.
It's the only, like the logical conclusion of all of this stuff.
It's the only path.
Is that it's harder and harder and harder to be successful at all because a small number of people, an ever shrinking number of people, inevitably end up with everything because of this very fact that as things change, if you have the tools and capital and flexibility and freedom to keep on changing with it, then you get to keep capturing the upside over and over and over and over again. While those who can't, for any number of reasons, that just have nothing left, right? So,
yep, that's what's gonna happen when you've got robots who can cook, clean, and wait tables.
And make your art for you.
You know, what's going to happen when
when
computers can make your art? What's going to happen when computers can make movies, when computers can make music?
You know what I think is wild about this is that I feel like in all of the future guesses about how this was going to play out from like 10, 15 years ago, whatever else, so much of the focus was on the idea that robots would be taking over on service-related industries first, as opposed to the fact that robots actually appear to be very good at this sort of, again, on an output scale of the artistic side of being a person, whether it's creating code, creating art, music. You could have I've seen those, like, I mean, they're not good yet, but like the scripts that various AIs produce for like Batman movies and shit, which are hilarious to read because they're insane. But like that it's actually easier.
But that it already kind of works and it's just getting started, right? Because like, what is creativity if not taking ideas that are already there and trying to bang them together in new and interesting ways?
That's what I was getting at with the art thing, which is like if you ask any professional artist what their process is for putting together a new piece, a big part of it starts with gathering references.
Yeah, you machine learn.
Yeah, you as a brain go and do machine learning in the direction of the stuff that you're trying to get to, right?
Machine learning is just throwing a fuckload of data to things so that it can identify common patterns. That's it. Which is literally what
a person does. Yeah. Yeah. So I mean, which makes sense, right? Because I mean, it's like if a computer can look at a billion things and analyze them and slap them together in a quadrillion different ways, right? Then like once you figure out a way to tell it what's a good output versus a bad output and how to sort of identify those patterns of how to more reliably slap things together to get better output more consistently, which again, that's what people do, right? Mm-hmm. Then it's not, we're not that far off from the first hit song on the radio generated fully by a computer with no actual person singing it. It's just a synthetic voice, or whatever.
It may already exist and we just don't know it yet.
We may not. Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of musicians that I personally have never seen in the real world. So this may have been going on for quite some time and we don't actually know it. And if you read some of their tweets, it does kind of make sense that some of them are actually just, random blobs of code being slapped together to see what comes out. Oh man. Well, anyways, that kind of went in a direction I wasn't expecting, but that's literally all the time we have.
Yep.
So we'll be hitting quite a bit of questions coming up. I will be heading out to India pretty soon. So our upcoming episodes are going to be pretty question dense and not very news dense because we've got to pre-record some of them. So we'll definitely be piling on the questions in these upcoming episodes. So that's all the time we have. I would like to thank our producers Fat Bard and Sampa DaCosta for putting the podcast together, and thanks to our community moderators who keep our Discord running. To get more involved in the Butterscotch community, go to podcast.bscotch.net, where we have links to the Discord, a way for you to donate, and links to the archives. Thank you all for listening, and we'll see you next week.
Goodbye.
Bye.